Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Conroy with the National Sports Media Association. Today, I'm here speaking with 2022 South Carolina Sports Writer of the Year, Grace Raynor. Grace, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So my first question, I wanted to just sort of go back to the beginning. I wanted to ask how you got your first job in sports media, and then sort of take me along your career path to where you are now.
Sure. I got my first job in, let's see, it was the spring of 2016. I had just finished an internship with MLB.com the following fall and was freelancing. And then my first job was at the Post and Courier newspaper in Charleston, and they had an opening for a little bit of just general assignments, some minor league baseball, some sailing, just community sports, high school sports, what have you. And actually, I got it through, I had been freelancing for SEC Country at the time, and one of the editors of SEC Country used to work at the Post and Courier. So that was probably my first lesson of not necessarily what you know, but who you know, and how small our network can be once you finally sort of crack into it. But yes, that was my first job, was at the Post and Courier in 2016.
Gotcha. And then how did you come to reach the Athletic where you are now?
Sure. So I worked at the Post and Courier for almost a year living in Charleston. And then about 10 months in, our Clemson writer at the time, who lived in the Greenville area, decided that he was going to be getting out of the industry and moving back out west. And so that's how I got my first Clemson job. I moved up to Greenville and started covering Clemson for the newspaper. And then I did that for about 2 years, then started covering Clemson for The Athletic in the spring of 2019. And then in May of last year, sort of transitioned more into a recruiting, just sort of general Southeast, still doing some Clemson, of course, but just kind of expanding my footprint a little bit.
Gotcha. My next question I wanted to ask, so you've had a couple of stops already in your career. What advice would you give to a young person or maybe a college student who's sort of looking to get that first opportunity right out of college or get into the world of sports media? What sort of tips would you have?
Totally. I would say my biggest tip is whatever you think that you want to do, whether it's writing or broadcasting or radio or PR, whatever you think it is, I would say do a lot of it now at your college. I remember when it was time to apply for jobs, of course, as a writer, the first thing they wanted to know was, all right, send us your clips. And I remember being very grateful that when it came time to pick my clips, having 4 years of writing for the student newspaper, I could pick truly my best five. And I was picking five out of probably 150 or 200 instead of five out of 10 or 20. So I'm such a huge proponent of the college setting being so valuable. It's a very forgiving environment, where you can take a lot of creative risks and just sort of figure out what your voice is going to be, and just try out a bunch of different things all at once. So that would be my biggest tip, is just get involved now. Whether, even if you're not sure if you know what you want to do, just try a bunch of things now, because this is definitely the time in your life to do it.
Yeah, certainly good advice there. Um, so you mentioned that you sort of got your start back in 2016. Almost 7 years later, it's 2023. What are some of the most impactful stories you can point to over your career so far?
Oh, that's a good one. Also, I can't believe it's in 7 years. Oh my gosh. Um, I like doing the types of stories that require you to go a little bit deeper than just your typical press conference or the media access that the school gives you, because college sports, the access it's not great. So I would say one of my favorite stories was right when I got my start. This was when Clemson had just won the national championship against Alabama, with the Hunter Renfrow catch with 1 second left on the clock. And that summer, Hunter actually let me he let me drop by his family vacation for a day at the beach with about 100 Renfros. They have a very large, a large family, and there were tons of cousins there. And it was just really cool to see how his life had changed since scoring that touchdown, and how he had gone from just almost a nobody. He would be the first to tell you that he was a walk-on, and Dabo Sweeney joked a lot about how people thought he was the water boy, to now he couldn't go to Walmart and get dog food without people just totally going nuts for autographs. So I would say that was one of my favorites for sure. Just seeing people outside of their normal football life. I got to spend some time with Trevor Lawrence's older brother, who is the Trevor Lawrence of art, if you will. He's a really incredible artist. So that was a cool way to get to know Trevor sort of in a different setting. So I would say just those types of stories, the ones that let you learn something, because if you're learning something new, then your readers definitely will be too.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that Hunter Renfrow catch. I remember watching that game. That was a great one. Um, so my next question, I wanted to ask about this award. So obviously, you've spent pretty much your entire career to this point as a sports writer, perfecting your craft. What does it mean to have your work recognized with a Sports Writer of the Year award, especially one that's, chosen by your peers?
I think that's the really cool part of it, right? Is that it's chosen by your peers. I think anyone in journalism would be the first to tell you that if you are getting into it for awards, you're making a huge mistake. And there's just a lot more to it. But I think in any industry, the validation of your peers who understand what really good work looks like and the time and effort that goes into it. I've always thought that that's super cool because no one knows you in your field like your own peers. And I know that I've learned so much reading other people's work. And so I think that's definitely the coolest part. And I feel just really honored that my peers liked some of the things that I wrote in 2022.
Certainly well deserved. So congratulations again. You mentioned earlier in the call that with your role right now, you're sort of expanding your footprint a little bit. So I was wondering what have been some of the most rewarding parts of that, and what are some of the things you're most excited about covering this year?
Oh, that's a good one. I think the most exciting part about the way that I've gotten to cover recruiting this year is just kind of looking at it a little bit differently than I used to. It used to be when I covered Clemson full time, I looked through the recruiting lens of exactly through a Clemson lens. Who's coming? Who's visiting? Are they interested in Clemson? Now that it's a little more national, I get to dive into a lot of trends, some fun stories, just stories that I probably never would have written before. I wrote a really fun one a couple of months ago, actually with Audrey Snyder, my coworker, in Pennsylvania. We wrote this story about what it's like when a college coach visits your campus or your high school, and just the stories that we heard about Trevor Lawrence's high school coach accidentally locking Dabo Sweeney out of the building, or a high school coach getting stuck in a rainstorm, locked out of his own car with Nick Saban. Just really fun things like that. And I think that one of the things that I've been trying to remember is that if I'm having fun reporting these stories, then my readers are probably also going to feel that through our writing. So I think that has definitely been what I'm most excited about, is just to look at it a little bit differently.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned that. Ryan Day visited my high school one time, and I had a similar
Oh,
experience.
that's amazing. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I love that so much. What high school did you go to?
I'm from Ohio, so I went to Archbishop Alter.
That's awesome.
There was a kid who was actually ended up going to Ohio State a couple years younger than me, but I just remember turning the corner and seeing Ryan Day in one of my hallways. It
That's
was
amazing.
interesting.
Yes, exactly. We had one kid tell us that he was in the restroom and he looked up and Urban Meyer was a couple of stalls down. So I can imagine that's a pretty surreal feeling.
Total shock. Yeah, so last question, I wanted to ask, what was it like getting to cover a figure like Dabo Sweeney? Because he's such
Sure.
a interesting figure in the world of sports, and I cover Wake Forest myself, so I have, he's obviously a big voice in the ACC and across college football. So what was that like?
It was really cool because I felt like when I was getting into my career, I always wanted to, first of all, I always wanted to be in college sports. And my hope was that I would be covering either a college basketball or a college football team. I didn't really care which sport that was nationally relevant. And I got really, really lucky with Clemson because I think the cool thing about Dabo and covering him is that when he speaks, people want to know what he's saying. And a lot of times they don't agree with what he's saying. And he has been a little bit of a lightning rod, but he tells you exactly what he thinks. And I respect that from him because you never leave wondering, I wonder what he meant by that. Um, and it just gave me a national audience at a really young but critical point in my career, which I'm very thankful for. So, I really enjoyed it. I mean, I think that he is obviously one of the biggest figures in our sport, and he is not going to stop telling you what he thinks and how he feels. And so to be able to get a front row seat to that and to ask him questions about, well, what do you mean by that? Or why do you feel this way? Or explain to people why he thinks differently, I think was really valuable and really cool. So I felt very lucky that I covered a team that was winning a lot of games and had a lot of interest very early in my career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure I speak for everyone when we say we can't wait to see what comes next for you this year. So
Oh,
great.
thanks.
Congratulations again, and thank you for taking the time.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.